swing, 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 swing. Los Angeles, come take me home, cause I've been in exile from Babel to Rome, and it's been so long since I see my land. So come save your sheep with your mighty hand as the war is cold in the dark of night. Yes, the time has come to see the sun's light. While some fight for wealth, we fight for liberty. So to overcome the word is gonna take you and me to bring forth the kingdom, which is our ultimate goal. That's why we're telling Pharaoh to let our people go. Let our people go. Let our people go. Swing go. Go. Let our people go. 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 Let our people go. Swing low, chariot, take me home. Swing low, chariot, take me home.
Hallelujah. Yit Gadal Vadit Kadesh Shemei Rabbah. Bi'almadi Barakirotei Vayimelich Malkutei. V'chayechunu v'yamichunu v'chayede kol beit Yisrael. Bagalav Izman Kari V'miru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mavorach Leolam Ulmei Almaya. Yit Barak Vayishtabach. V'yit Pa'ar V'yit Roman V'yit Naseh. V'yit Adar V'yit Alei V'yit Alal Shemei Dekudashah Berechu. Le'ela min kol barachata v'ashirata tush bechata v'nechmata. Damiran ba'alma. V'miru. Amen. Magnified and sanctified may his great name be in the world he created by his will. May he establish his kingdom in your lifetime, and in your days, and in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon. And let us say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever in all time. Blessed and praised, esteemed and exalted, raised and honored, uplifted and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond any blessing, song, praise, and consolation uttered in the world. And let us say, Amen. Hallelujah. Good evening, and welcome to Hebrew Vision Live. I'm your host, Mikael Corbin Yahoo, and you're tuned in to our broadcast of Signs of the Times. We are going to be reviewing some headlines in Hebrew Vision News today, which you can find on our blog spot, HebrewVisionNews.blogspot.com. We're going to be perusing through some of the articles and addressing them and looking at them in the spirit of prophecy. But the track that you just heard opening, which is our theme song, which is up for nomination for Hebrew Track of the Year, Hebrew Music Track of the Year on the Facebook page, is Let My People Go. It is by Sister Nakia Bat Yahuda, Brother Nehemiah Yasharun, our quote, Yaleach Bat Yahuda, and yours truly, Mikael Corbin Yahoo. Very powerful track that we put down in the Holy Land for our people. And so today, as I mentioned, we're going to be going over the signs of the times, looking into some of the headlines that we have posted on HebrewVisionNews.blogspot.com, just going over some of the news that we have perused and found today and put on our blog spot. But I want to open up with the passage from Matthew 24, and we're going to read verses 3 through verse 8. It reads as follows. Matthew 24, verse 3 through 8. And as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the taught ones came to him separately, saying, Say to us, when shall this be? And what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Yahushua answering said to them, Take heed that no one lead you astray. For many shall come in my name and say, I am the Messiah, and they shall lead many astray. And you shall begin to hear of fightings and reports of fightings. See that you are not troubled, for these have to take place, but the end is not near. But the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and reign against reign, And there shall be scarcities of food and deadly diseases and earthquakes in various places. And all these are the beginnings of birth pains. And so when we look into the scriptures and we examine them and divide them according to the signs, and then we look out on the geopolitical landscape of the world, we see what is taking place. And we see what is developing. And we are aligning all of these matters as relates to the coming of the kingdom of Yah and the establishment of Israel again as the sole sovereign rulers of this earth. But we're going to start with an article that comes to us from Breaking Israel News. It is written by Dr. Rivka Lambert Adler. This was on July 4th, interestingly. And actually, we're going to take a step back from that article, Slikai. We're going to go to another article from Breaking Israel News. This one is actually just as interesting. The name of the article is entitled, New Star to Appear in Night Sky, Heralding Balaam's Prophecy of Messiah. This is written by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz on January 10th, just 2 days ago. He opens with the scripture from Psalm 147, verse 4, saying, He counts the number of the stars. He gives them all their names. Berkowitz says 5 years from now, the light from the ancient collision of two stars will reveal a brand new star in the night sky. According to Jewish esoteric sources, this is precisely the celestial phenomenon which will accompany the arrival of the Messiah. The new star expected to appear in 2022 in a blaze of light called a nova will be the brightest heavenly body visible in the nighttime sky for 6 months. It will be the first time in recorded history that a celestial event of this kind will be witnessed by the naked eye. Beyond its scientific uniqueness, the appearance of the new star could have much bigger implications for the earthbound, one prominent rabbi told Breaking Israel News, pointing to a biblical prophecy of Balaam, which hails the appearance of a new star as the precursor to Messiah. He says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not nigh. There shall step forth a star out of Yaakov, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite through the corners of Moab, and break down all the sons of Shech, which is Numbers 24, verse 17. Rabbi Yosef Berger, rabbi of King David's tomb on Mount Sion, cited Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, known by the acronym Rambam, or also as Maimonides, the foremost Torah authority of the 12th century. And keep in mind, he was a Moor. Let's be clear of that. Whose rulings are still used as the basis for much of Jewish law. The Rambam brings this verse about a star appearing as proof that the Messiah will come one day. Rabbi Berger told Breaking Israel News, but he says it will come from Yaakov and not from Esau. Very, very important distinction. More specifically, from the tribe of Yehuda. And we know this. In Hebrew vision, we are quite acquainted with Mashiach ben Dawid, who we proclaim in this particular school of thought, that is Yahoshua ben Yosef. Even more incredibly, the Zohar, the foundational work of Jewish mysticism, predicts in detail the color and type of stars which will appear. The Zohar states explicitly that the messianic process will be accompanied by several stars appearing. The Zohar goes into great depth describing how many stars and which colors they will be. Now, let's keep in mind that you are the stars of heaven, Israel. You are the signs that are to be heeded. For Abraham was told that if he was able to count the stars, so would his seed be. But that illusion, what it alludes to, is that his children are the stars. Yosef had the dream of the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing to his star. So that connects Israel and all the tribes with that of the stars. This new star, announced last week by Larry Molnar, a professor of astronomy at Calvin College in Michigan, will certainly be unusual. It is a binary star, or two stars orbiting a central point. Molnar described it as two peanuts sharing a single shell. In his observations, Molnar noted that the orbital period was decreasing at an accelerating rate, leading him to understand that the two stars were moving closer to each other. Based on a previous case of binary stars, Molnar predicted the two stars would collide in 2022, resulting in a massive explosion. The collision will release as much energy as the sun releases in its entire lifetime, Molnar said in a video about the discovery. When the two finally collide, it will create a new star, a red nova. A red nova. The star's brightness will increase 10,000-fold, making it one of the brightest points in the heavens for 6 months, after which it will fade and remain as a smaller dot in the sky. It will be the first time in history that the creation of a new star will be visible with the naked eye. It's a 1 in a million chance that you can predict an explosion, Molnar said. It's never been done before. Ira Makafesky, an amateur astronomer with 60 years of experience who runs stargazing tours in Mizpeh Ramon, a town perched on a huge crater in the Negev desert, has been following the story closely. He described the delicate balance between science and faith to breaking Israel news. The heavens, especially unique phenomena like this nova, are a manifestation of Elohim's intellect. But this has to be understood in a specific manner in Yahudut, or Judaism, Makafesky warned. Astronomy and astrology are prominent in Jewish mysticism since the Most High works through nature. But at the same time, the term for pagan idol worship is avodot, kochavim o mazalot, or serving stars and signs. We as Israel, we observe them. We do not serve them. Israel is not subject to the influence of the stars because through our Torah observance, we actually transcend the influence of the stars. So when you're dealing with zodiacs and you're dealing with astrological readings, those things and those who serve them are actually idol worshipers. We, however, rely solely on the prophetic oracles of the Most High. That is our sense of service. We serve Yah through the obedience to his Torah. And therefore we transcend astrophysic influence. Okay, so this is crucial, and that is a very crucial point that this individual by the name of Makafesky makes in this point. He goes on to quote the Talmud in Sukkot 29a. Thus says Hashem, learn not the ways of the Gentiles, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the nations are dismayed at them. The idolaters will be dismayed, but Israel will not be dismayed. And of course, that's commentary actually on Jeremiah chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. So according to Hasidic philosophy, the well springs of knowledge will be opened up in the times of the Moshiach, or the Messiah, Makafesky said. It's truly amazing that astronomers can predict this when just a few years ago, we wouldn't have known about this until the stars suddenly appeared. Science, which is when used properly, has enabled us to share in Yah's natural processes. For stargazers, this nova will be visible as part of the constellation Cygnus, adding a star to the northern cross star pattern. It's a cross star, northern cross star pattern that is going to be appearing in. So though the nova will appear in a few years, the actual event took place already 1,800 years ago. It has taken nearly 2 millennia for the light from the collision to reach the earth. Very interesting article from Israel Breaking News as relates to the appearance of the Moshiach, or the Messiah. All right. Because these are the times in which people are anticipating this. There are people who are keeping their eyes out for this. And this is what Yahushua told us, is that as lightning flashes from the east to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Adam be. But that meaning is so profound in its Kabbalistic nature, in that he's speaking about the ascent and the descent of Jacob's ladder, which is the tree of life. And it's a moment. It is an instantaneous moment in which there will be a shift, a complete polar shift of consciousness, which will allow the Mashiach to arise in spirit and in truth and to be revealed. More on that at another time. Let's look at this next article here. Very interesting article that I want to read. It's called Connecting the Dots Between the Igbo and the Yahudim. I want to focus on Israel first, because again, we are the signs. We are those signs. We are those stars. Well, actually, the article is entitled Connecting the Dots Between the Igbo and the Jews. It's a very interesting article from IsraelRising.com. The article is written by one Matthew Imbanaja. He is an Igbo. This was written on January 10th as well. He says, historians have more often than not tried to convince us of the similarity between the Igbo man and the Jews. This is traceable to some remote historical similarities, yet unproved scientifically. Now, what has been proved scientifically, however, is that the Limba, now they're using genetics, of course, have a Y chromosome. But what a recent interview that I had with J.C. Ndebo Hughes has demonstrated is that language and cultural practices bear a much more significant indicator of lineage and identity. Okay? This is because it carries over into the ancestral practices and even into the present. And so when you look at the Igbo, we're going to discover they have many, many affinities to ancient Israel and Torah observance. So he goes on to say, there are nevertheless irresistible similarities accounted in the Bible in terms of social and cultural similarities traceable to the Igbo man and Jewish counterpart. Part of the similarities are the problem of diaspora, or living outside one's homeland, either by exile or deliberate migration in search of its livelihood and its consequences. There is also the enterprising capability found in both these similarities the Igbo supposedly have with Jews, marginally biblical, should also pose a fundamental challenge to him in his Nigerian circumstances. The experience of settling outside their native homeland was no doubt a common feature of the Jewish people. This experience was usually linked with religious, socio-political antecedents and some negative consequences. Explaining the term diaspora, John Lawrence Mackenzie, in his book entitled Two-Edged Sword, the most significant Catholic interpretation of the Old Testament ever written in English, says this word became a technical term for Jewish communities settled outside Palestine during the last century BC and the first century AD. The settlement of Hebrews outside Palestine began with the deportation of Israelites by the Assyrians and Babylonian kings in the 8th, 7th, and 6th centuries BC. As a contagiously religious people and the Most High's elect, the Jews were at times allowed to be deported or exiled to other nations by the Most High as a punitive measure for their disloyalty to the divine covenant. As other times, as a desperately enterprising people with high instinct for survival, they moved out on their own in search of economic leverage, as we see them in Egypt in this account from the Bible. And this was from a few weeks ago, Parsha. Quote, there was a famine in every country, but throughout Egypt there was food. But when all Egypt too began to feel the famine, and the people appealed to Pharaoh for food, who told all Egyptians, go to Yosef and do whatever he tells you. Yaakov, seeing that there were supplies to be had in Egypt, said to his sons, I hear, he said, that there are supplies in Egypt. Go down and procure some for us there so that we may survive and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to procure grains in Egypt. This is Genesis 41, 54 through 56, and then chapter 42, verses 1 through 3. In whatever circumstances and for whatever reasons the Jews found themselves settled outside their land, the inescapable consequences were obvious, and the experience were horrifying and excruciating to the necking point. These two are the experiences of Igbo people of Nigeria today, before the Civil War in the 1970s. The Most High Position General Chukwu Emeka Odum Egwu Ojuju as the military governor of Eastern Region to protect the elect of Elohim's people of Biafra from the wicked advancing troops whose aim was complete annihilation of Indibo. Like at the Red Sea, just one and last flying Obununjiwe at Abagana, miracle saved Biafra from the last and biggest onslaught of the advancing Murtala Mohammed troop, who was bent on the final massacre of Indibo. 200 utility vehicles were blown up with thousands of men and ammunition. Murtala escaped the incident with wound and went to live in the UK till the war ended. There are many Igbo families living outside Igbo land whose children cannot speak Igbo language but can speak English, Hausa, Yoruba, Efik French, etc. fluently. Most of these our children have no sense of our culture and no idea of the homeland they have blended into the society they find themselves. I once met a young man in Cotonou, Republic of Benin, whom I took for a son of the soil, only for me to hear that his last name was Kalu. When I asked him, he told me in French that his mother told him that his father is Igbo, and I asked him where Igbo is. He told me that it was across the border. It is common and universal acknowledgement that the Igbo man is generally the most traveled, outgoing, enterprising person in Africa. Though this is inherent in them like the Jewish counterparts, but this migration has increased in an arithmetic progression since after the Civil War as a consequence of the punishment placed on them for the war, which has left them dangerously destitute, marginalized, deprived, fear-stricken, humiliated, with no choice but to seek for survival in any corner of the world that can shield him and family from another Kwashiorkor. Speaking also of their enterprising spirit side by side with the unique marginalization and oppression meted to Igbos by the nation that has left the older generation with post-traumatic stress syndrome, the late respected social critic Gani Fa Wehenimi in 2000 Independence Day anniversary stated that the Igbos are the only community that can squeeze water out of stone. I want to categorically state here that heavy investment outside her territory is where the Igbo man has shorted himself on the foot compared with the Jewish community in the diaspora, who is cautioned with the sworn nostalgia to still cherish their homeland and not forget it while the physical separation and suffering lasts. So he swears, if I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill, whether what a great sense of patriotism and homeward and native feeling for one's soil, what a love for a nation. Here is the fundamental difference between the Igbo man and the Jews in terms of the positive thoughts of not forgetting his homeland. The immediate past Nigerian president, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, on 17 March 2014 in Abuja, Nigeria, inaugurated the 2014 National Conference. Most Igbo representatives, whom I refer to here as house slaves, went to the conference in high spirit and one common agenda: resource control. When their northern counterparts, who are more versed in politics, reminded them They are also in agreement with the resource control agenda, provided they understand that the entire properties of Abuja and its surrounding lands belong to the North and will form part of their resources since it's situated in the northern country. From that moment, the house slaves went into their shells and never mentioned resource control till today. Yes, the Igbo man owned 90% properties in Abuja, while his local government has nothing. Even a commercial shop, in case of what happened in 1966, rears its ugly head. The tortoise asks his children, how many ugly incidents in your life should teach you a lesson? I asked Igbo elites who are busy investing in Lagos and Abuja. He asked them a question in the Igbo language. But this is why we postulated our basic problem has been identified. Hence, we appeal to our brothers and those who take advantage of shortcomings imposed on us by the system to come to terms and know that divided we fall, united we stand as a rock. From the end of the Civil War till date, the Igbos have been systematically denied the privilege or right to federal infrastructural presence, besides the indigenization degree, which was promulgated to change economic power from the Igbo man to the Yoruba and their northern ally. The shattered Igbo returnees were handed only 20 pounds note to start life, while the rest of the country was busy buying up all the major industries in Lagos and the north. Not even a functioning federal industry could be found in Igbo land except the prisons. Even the industries that were functional before the war have been systematically allowed to die. Example of which are the Nkagalu cement industry and the expanding coal mining industry. There are two major oil fields in Igbo heartland owned by the Canadian oil giants Adex Petroleum, with 29 pump stations at Izombe and 25 pump stations at Ozubolo oil fields. All the directors and senior staff of this company are either Yoruba or Hausa. The Igbos who invested in properties in the south were given the shock of their lives in the name of abandoned property, chaired by the one-time Senate president in 1970, when they went back to Port Harcourt after the Civil War to claim their leftovers. The suffering and suffocation of the Igbo man in search of economic leverage has left him a constant floating, a constant liquid of pilgrim. This has left him in a complex psychology of living in a duality of culture and personality, and in complete oblivion of his natural home and its development. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of this article, but I wanted to share this because Israel, you can find them sharing similar experiences the world over. The Igbos are marginalized. The Igbos, who identify as Israel, are oppressed. The Igbos suffer from an identity crisis. The Igbos suffer from being economically and systematically deprived, disenfranchised. The Igbos are murdered for sport. They share a very common plight, as prophecy would have it, than that with us. We share a very similar experience. In fact, let's take a look at our experiences. This is an article that comes to us from Insight News out of Minnesota. This is an article written by a Harry Colbert Jr. He's the Insight News managing editor. The name of the article is entitled, "There'll Be No One Left When They Come For You." He says, I make no bones about it. When it comes to politics, I am left-leaning, to far left-leaning in my views. In every presidential election since I've been eligible to vote in 1988, I have voted for the Democrat, he says. Same with the most local races too, though not exclusively. A friend in Missouri ran for statewide office as a Republican, and I was happy to vote for him. Though we differed on many issues, I believed him to be an honorable person who would not place party lines over the overall good of the people. Within my core group of friends, at least one is a Republican, and others who are certainly moderate. We argue politics while at the same time celebrating our wonderful friendships. Now, This was what you would be considered a house slave, okay? Because he is a part of the establishment and he is a participant in the establishment. Okay, so we're going to deal with a corollary, not a corollary, but a something that is, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to look at a counter view of this very shortly as well. But in the process, I want to just kind of go over this and see what he's saying, okay? So I believe most Republicans, he writes, to be wrong on issues of civil rights, voting rights, the economy, fair housing, education, deregulation, marriage equality, abortion, climate change, and the list goes on. I'm happy to respectfully discuss and debate any of these topics with Republicans. And afterward, we can hang out and have drinks together and agree that the Vikings totally collapsed again. The Timberwolves are a point guard away from being a real contender. Winter in Minnesota is way too cold. Crab legs are the best thing since sliced bread, he says. And Justin Bieber and Young Thug are abominations to music. We can mutually wish to never hear another word about anyone with the last name Kardashian. I preface all that to say this. My issues with, as of January 20, President Donald Trump is not that he is a Republican. It is with him as a person who is not suited for nor qualified to be in the office of the presidency. Though that has been my belief since day one, and the belief of that at least 62 of 67% of the Americans in polls taken just 4 months ago. This commentary is pinned on the heels of Trump's first press conference since winning the Electoral College vote, yet losing the popular vote by some 2.9 million votes. But to call the January 11 event a press conference is in itself misleading and insulting to members of the press. And I don't know if anyone listening actually saw that. I didn't see it. I saw, of course, some news feeds on it in which he just completely just went off on the news and disregarded questions, disregarded reporters, disregarded news agencies, and saying you're fake news, and just completely sidestepped and bullied the press, and not really being objective and allowing the individuals in the audience to present, their questions in their role of journalism. Now, of course, journalism is very, very jaded right now. The entire field is, which is why this citizen journalist, myself and others who have podcasts and blogs are attempting to present alternative views for the people. And this is what Hebrew Vision Live is all about, is to present the people's voice. We want to make sure that we are represented, our voices are heard, though it may not be as at a larger market or to have many listeners as mainstream news, but we still nonetheless are here to present a voice, okay? But continuing on, he says that's what happened when Trump went on a tirade against CNN. And when a respected reporter with the network, tried to question the president, not only was he berated and not allowed to ask his question, he was warned that if he continued to attempt to ask a question, he would be removed. And he says, folks, that's how it all starts. In the same assembly, I refused to legitimize what I saw as a press conference where Trump talked about consulting on a Supreme Court nominee with the Federalist Society, a group that believes in the most literal interpretation of the Constitution. Trump trampled upon the document's very First Amendment. For those less educated, allow me to present the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. A fifth grader in social studies can tell you the meaning of the First Amendment, yet our soon-to-be president either has no concept of or no respect for the amendment, and therefore the Constitution itself. For a president in a free and open society, as we are for now, to threaten to remove a reporter because he doesn't like the legitimate questions being raised, questions about Russian involvement into America's election, it is 2 or 3 steps away towards the demise of democracy in the land, a land that has up until this point been across the globe the standard bearer for democracy. And I don't necessarily agree with the author's statement in that, because we know that it has been a police state for people of a darker hue from the time that we were forced on these shores to toil without any compensation for the benefit of other people. Continuing on, though, he says, this cannot be the new America in which we live. This is not China. This is not North Korea. This is not yet Russia. With President Trump, the democracy, the basic freedoms is at stake. And he just seems to forget the history of our people in this land. This cannot go unnoticed and it cannot go unchecked. He says, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Those are the words of Martin Niemöller, talking about those who stood idly by as Adolf Hitler and the Nazis rose to power in Germany, killing up to 6 million human beings simply because of their religious faith. And that's, of course, the surface story that we're told, but there was something much deeper at stake. And it was the religious stance that they had, a Torah-based principle, in that they understood that Zionism wasn't supposed to allow the state of Israel to be established. It was rather those who were observant of Torah, the true Orthodox Yahudim, who were not Zionists, who were not politically or secularly inclined, were speaking out against those who were so much more political and much more secular in their orientation. But earlier during the spectacle that Trump called a press conference, he said that's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do in one of his many tantrums, this one maligning the United States intelligence community. Sadly, when talking about Trump, the parallels to Nazi Germany are eerily similar. And it's so interesting that the parallels and the mentionings and the broadcasts and the different shows that are coming out and movies are all harking back to Nazi Germany. So it's just a very, very ominous time that we're living in. And if you're seeing the signs and you can kind of put the pieces together and make sense of what's on the horizon. So he goes on to say, in order for there to have been a Holocaust, there had to have been a time before it. It is within that time the reason could have prevailed. It is within this time that we must vehemently object to any further slides down the slippery slope towards the collapse of democracy in this land. This is kind of baffling me as he writes this, because although he makes some good points, there's a very ahistorical stance that this author is taking, and I just really find it interesting that his identity, with a land that has historically been opposed to your freedoms and our freedoms as a people, is in such a position that this author is, as he writes. He says, before I'm a liberal or a Democrat, he says I'm an American. Before others are conservative or Republican, they too are Americans. Collectively, we should all stand up for America and the principles for which we say it stands. If not, there'll be no one left when they come for you. And I just want to really show how, again, the identity crisis, right? Malcolm X said, I'm not an American. I'm a victim of Americanism. Well, along with 20 million other so-called African Americans or so-called Negroes at that time, right? So, that's one way to look at it, and to see how those who pledge allegiance and identify as such, place themselves for a huge disappointment. Because time and time again we've been shown what this country thinks of us. So much so, I want to present this article here, coming up next. This is coming to us from Countercurrent News. Oh, the article got taken down. Let me see if I can find it, actually. I think it got taken down. I do believe it did. Let me go to the next page and see if it's up there. stories coming to us from, there it is, from California. This was printed yesterday in Countercurrent News by Jeremiah Jones. The name of the article is "No Criminal Charges for El Cajon, California Cop Who Fatally Shot Alfred Olango." Now, Alfred Olango was the African brother who was dealing with some, episodes of his mental condition, and he was unarmed, of course, and murdered. But here it is, you have just last week the shooter in Fort Lauderdale Airport murdered, so many people, but he gets taken alive. And it just doesn't make sense to see how you have men like the Colorado shooting incident, the patsy for that, and, several other people who have just gone on murder sprees and have been taken alive. But here it is, you have unarmed black men. I'm just using that term loosely, black, because it is a term that shows that, we're already dead in the eyes of the law, who are unarmed and have their lives taken by the police. Or they can apprehend someone who is a threat, a literal threat to society, with weapons, with arms. But they can neutralize their force without using deadly force and apprehend them and bring them in. Dylan Roof, who just got sentenced to death, classic example. They took him to Burger King. He just killed 9 churchgoers. But someone who's unarmed, like Mr. Olango, having a mental distress moment, and he's murdered in cold blood. So Jeremiah Jones says, San Diego County District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis said shooting and killing Olango, an unarmed black man who was clearly in mental distress, was justified. This is what the attorney said, the DA. The El Cajon, California police officer who gunned down an unarmed black man, Alfred Olango, who was apparently having a mental breakdown, will not face criminal charges, the district attorney's office announced, according to the San Diego Union Tribune. Impunity. Without punishment. He murdered a man who was supposedly having who was having an episode in mental distress, unarmed, no threat to anyone more than himself, was murdered. And it was justified. Rather than admit the officer made a mistake or even consider that police may not be trained properly to deal with people in mental distress, the DA feels it is her ethical duty not to charge the officer, because apparently to simply charge officers with the crime, she must have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The law recognizes police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving, San Diego County, California District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis said during a news conference at the Hall of Justice, or rather, injustice. As prosecutors, we have an ethical duty to follow the law and only charge individuals when we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The only reasonable conclusion was the officer's actions were justified. Just madness. Olango's family denounced Dumanis' announcement and vowed to keep fighting for justice for their loved one. War has been declared on humanity. This is what the Olango family has said. And the battle line has been drawn, Olango's father, Richard Olango Abuka, said. Reporters at a separate news conference at Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church in South Crest. This is the time to talk for Alfred. This is the time to defend Alfred, and even to cry for Alfred. Olango Abuka, who immigrated to the U.S. from Uganda, said he was shocked that an officer in America could kill another person without being arrested. In supposedly uncivilized Uganda, right? This man is absolutely appalled and shocked that there is no recourse of justice for this incident and the loss of the life of his son. Coming from, again, and I'm just using this in the stereotypical sense because I know Uganda is beautiful. I know Uganda is civilized. I know Uganda has law there, right? and it has suffered from colonialism, but he is shocked that a police officer could get away with doing such an atrocious act. The president of the San Diego branch of the National Action Network, Reverend Shane Harris, said he will request that Governor Jerry Brown appoint a special prosecutor to the case, reports Brianna Edwards of The Root. Now, let me just read something, because this is what we have to understand. I mean, this just evoked this thought that we continuously and repeatedly look to our oppressors for justice. But it is senseless to continue to do such a matter, because we know that this justice will never come from our enemies, our oppressors. He says this: should any of you, holding a matter against another, go to be judged before the unrighteous? Why would you make an appeal? Just like Malcolm said, it's like you're a sheep and you're trying to get these wolves to understand that you need justice. So what you're going to do is go to the wolves and appeal for justice? That's not sensible. That's not rational. That's not logical. That's not intelligent. You can't appeal to a beast for the beast to give you justice. You have to go to a higher authority. Again, should any of you holding a matter against another go to be judged before the unrighteous and not before the set apart ones? Where is the African embassy involved in this? Where is the Ugandan embassy? The father should not be appealing to a higher authority in California. He should be going back to his people, to Uganda, and have Uganda put pressure on California. That's more logical. That's more sensible. And then we can bring this to an international type of level. That's all Malcolm was saying. We need to make this an international level. If we just keep this domestic, nothing ever is going to change. We are never going to see justice if we keep this domestic. This is an international human crisis. War has been declared on humanity. So if that's the case, go to the place where the human right can be argued and defended. Do you not know that the set apart one shall judge the world, and if the world is judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Now, I'm just going to pause there, because this is where we need to really come to a very, very concrete understanding of our role in this world as Israel. We need to get our houses in order. We need to discipline ourselves and master our obedience so that all disobedience can be therefore punished in righteousness and with justice. That is why the Most High called us. I want to continue finishing this article. Brian Dunn, an attorney representing Olango's wife and daughters, spoke out against the district attorney's ruling and said that they will not give up the fight for justice. This is not in any way going to diminish our resolve to seek justice for the family. Here it goes: through the civil justice system and the reforms that will work to ensure that this type of homicide does not occur in the future. So, civil justice in America, as relates to our reality, does not exist. It does not exist. And so that's why I was saying we need to appeal to a different body in order to bring forth justice for our people. And I think this next article is very telling of this particular matter. It comes to us from the Black Agenda Report. Very interesting article. It is entitled "The New Black Maroons to America. We Quit." We quit. Sometimes you just got to take your hands off, let it be, leave it alone, and watch it wither. This is written by Mark P. Fancher. He opens up with a quote saying, "There were slaves who looked for opportunities to kill the master and determine their own destiny." Now, I'm not advocating violence in any way, shape, form, or fashion, but listen to the principles and the ideas of this article. It is important that we understand this. He says, during 8 years of a black presidency, we witnessed a police violence epidemic. They said there were more police murders than there were lynchings in the past 3 years than the years of lynching. Statistically, per capita. You also have the poisoning of the Flint water supply, all this during the Obama administration. The criminalization of black school children, and the militarization of Africa. Many who pin their hopes on the Obama phenomenon must now decide whether the terror of systemic racial oppression and its consistent disregard for African life are best addressed through continuing pursuit of integration into the political structures and institutions of the oppressor. This is what we were just talking about. The Maroons, historically, I'm sure he's going to address this, were those who separated from society, who ran away from the plantation and formed their own communities in the hills. They became self-determinant. They became collective in their work and responsibility. They became cooperative in their economics. They united. Okay, this is what we call for. So, they also instead chose to walk the path to independence, self-sufficiency, and self-determination. The choice is not new, and through the years, Africans have had to make decisions. There were enslaved Africans who aspired to nothing greater than servitude in the slave owner's home. That's all they want to do. Maybe I can become a politician now. Maybe I can join the ranks of the police force. Maybe I can go about becoming a president of a corporation. At the same time, there were others who looked for opportunities to kill the master and escape into the wilderness to establish communities of Maroons who made their own way and determined their own destiny. Some who dreamed of a black nation also recognized the potential for alliances with communities resisting a common oppressor. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's sound logic to me. Africans fled slave plantations and strategically joined indigenous communities. Many journeyed into dense tropical regions of Florida, where they united, there it is again, with the Seminoles and shared with them rice cultivation techniques and other agricultural practices brought from West Africa. Historian William Loren Katz explained, quote, "The Seminole Nation offered their new friends some valuable gifts in return. Africans and other ethnic groups enjoyed an independent village status. Their only obligation was to pay a small agricultural tax to be used for the common defense. If Africans needed something besides freedom, it was a strong defense against slave hunters from the north, so their tax was well spent. Georgia slaveholders were soon invading Florida, seeking their runaways, and were soon meeting a united resistance by red and black armed forces." That sounds like solidarity to me, something we need to understand and actually enact and engage. Engage, then enact. After the institution of slavery was destroyed, Africans' instinct to live as independent, self-determined people persisted. In 1866, John Sanborn, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, commented, "The formerly enslaved Africans are the most industrious, economical, and in many respects, the more intelligent portion of the population of the Indian Territory. They all desire to remain in that territory upon land set apart for their own exclusive use." This 1866 statement by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs is contrary to what we're typically taught about African people and even enslaved Africans. The most industrious, economical, and more intelligent portion of the population African people were? Exactly. Let's remove these misconceptions and these misperceptions and these miseducated insights that we have of our ancestors. The instinct to separate from oppressive forces was global. By 1955, regions of the world that had been the focus of underdevelopment and exploitation recognized their shared plight, and in much the same way that enslaved Africans made common cause with First Nations people, representatives of so-called third world countries convened in Bandung, Indonesia. This is called the Bandung Conference, or the Non-Aligned Movement, which was birthed out of that. That meeting set the stage for the non-aligned movement that, in response to the Cold War, established as its mission to create an independent path in world politics that would not result in member states becoming pawns in the struggles between the major powers. Self-determination, crucial as relates to these non-aligned states. As we approach a new historical milestone, with most Africans perceiving as bleak prospects for integration into a new Trump-inspired political reality, advocates for self-determination may assume the idea of an alternative, independent political path will find greater resonance in the black community. And this is what Hebrew Vision has been calling for all along. Let's take our destiny into our own hands. Let's look to become more independent, more united, more self-sufficient, and more self-determined by any means necessary. However, for many, the idea of becoming the 21st century Maroons may take a little getting used to. It doesn't take many people. Let's establish a small community. Scripture just talks about 144,000 people who will ultimately change the world. So it doesn't take many like-minded, kindred-spirited people to get together to make this a reality. Throughout the African world, there is a perceived unbreakable connection between black people and the empire. There's a perceived unbreakable, but in reality, it's a perception inspired by misguided sentiment or ignorance or fear or some combination of these and other forces. The idea of cutting ties with the imperialist structure, political structure, is regarded by some as insane or at least impractical. Thus, the task of political disengagement demands assurance that the community is not embarking on a journey into the abyss. This challenge might be met by demonstrating that disengagement from global imperialism and exploitative domestic capitalism can be followed in short order by productive engagement and alliance with other enemies of imperialism. That would behoove us to find other groups of people who are at odds with imperialism, have solidarity with them, and work towards creating a new reality, a new system, a new paradigm, a new hegemon. These are the things that we need to look towards. In the same way that enslaved Africans established alliances with indigenous people, there are now comparable communities around the world with whom relationships might be established. In recent years, the appetite for such relationships has been demonstrated in various ways. Palestinian activists provided Ferguson protesters with advice about coping with tear gas. Venezuela made free and affordable heating oil available to low-income communities in the U.S. Cuba has not only made standing offers to provide cost-free medical education for the youth of underserved communities around the world, but they also stood ready to send a large army of physicians into Katrina-ravaged New Orleans. There has likewise been a perception that Africans in the U.S. are uniquely positioned to return the favor of these gestures of solidarity by championing within this country the struggles of peoples beyond U.S. borders. This has certainly been true with respect to the Palestinian cause, efforts to end the economic isolation of Cuba and Zimbabwe, and the ongoing struggle to dislodge U.S. military troops from Africa. In addition to relationships with progressive countries in the Western Hemisphere and any movement among the First Nations that might grow out of the Standing Rock experience, there are progressive to revolutionary forces in various parts of Africa with whom Western black communities might make common cause. The consolidation of these relationships into a global network that has its own politics, trade arrangements, and diplomatic relationships can enhance prospects for the attainment of long-term goals like the establishment of a continent-wide African superstate and the eventual triumph of the world's revolutionary forces over imperial power. When it comes to politics, we don't have to accept the programs of the Democrats, Republicans, or any other players in rigged political process. Like the Maroons, we can say no thanks to all of it. That's something that Hebrew Vision advocates right there. Divestment. Come out of her, my people, lest you partake in her sins and receive of her plagues. You're listening to Hebrew Vision Live. This is our broadcast of Signs of the Times today. We're just going over some headlines that we have posted on our blog spot and just addressing some of the recent current news events that are taking place in society, and some of also some perspectives in this society as well. So, speaking of imperialism, speaking of dealing with this hegemon, speaking of dealing with the encroaching and impending reality of what is known as Imperial America, let's take another look at a Black Agenda report dealing with this past Tuesday's last presidential address of Barack Obama. This is written by Black Agenda Report executive editor Glenn Ford. The name of the article is Obama's Last Presidential Lies. He starts out by saying, Barack Obama has spoken to the nation as president for the last time. Hallelujah, he says. The man I dubbed the more effective evil now gets a chance to make millions for himself after spending 8 years defending the wealth of the bankers and the rest of the 1%. Obama is going out like he came in, telling lies with great style and skill. So many lies. He said he favored giving unions the power to organize for better wages. He said the same thing when he was campaigning for his first term, promising to support the card check bill that would have allowed workers to rebuild their union membership. But he betrayed organized labor and did nothing to push the bill in Congress. The outgoing president pointed out that the effects of slavery and Jim Crow didn't just vanish in the 60s, that these effects continue to plague black people. But 100 days after first taking that oath of office, Obama told reporters that he would not consider programs targeted at black communities, that blacks would have to depend on a rising tide to lift all boats, even though no such tide has ever risen for black people in America. Obama has said the U.S. led the world on the promise to save the planet. That's an outrageous lie. The U.S., China, and a few other powerful countries have been the problem, not the solution to climate change. Obama spent his first term sabotaging every effort to create mandatory limits on emissions. The first black president acknowledged that many Americans are convinced that their government only serves the interests of the powerful. But he didn't take any of the blame, even though it was under his administration that Wall Street bankers were deemed too big to jail or even to indict. In the same dishonest fashion, Obama declared on Tuesday that we need to uphold laws against discrimination and in our criminal justice system, when on his watch, no federal charges were brought against any killer cops except one who had already been indicted by local authorities. Obama got downright cocky in defense of Obamacare, the right-wing Republican health program that Obama adopted as his own. The president said If anybody can put together a plan that is demonstrably better, I will support it. But don't bet any money on the letter and spirit of Obama's promises on health care. Back in 2003, when Bruce Dixon and I asked him if he favored a single-payer healthcare system, Obama answered that he favored universal health care for all Americans and intended to introduce or sponsor legislation toward that end. He kept saying that for the next 5 years, until he was elected president, and then proceeded to isolate and crush supporters of single-payer to the delight of the insurance and drug industries, which no longer had to fear single-payer. Obama is sneaky that way. Finally, Obama bragged that the U.S. has taken out thousands of terrorists, including bin Laden. What he didn't say was that his administration presided over the jihadist takeovers of Libya and much of Syria and Iraq. The truth is that tens of thousands of jihadists have been trained, armed, financed, and protected by the United States and its allies, not under Bush, but under Obama, making him fully responsible for the death of 500,000 people in those 3 countries alone, not to mention Obama's other wars, but I've run out of time. The good thing is, so has Obama. Glenn Ford for the Black Agenda Report. Very powerful article because so many people have drank the Kool-Aid and have bit into the cyanide pill that he gracefully slipped in to our drinks and said, let's stay together. Very, very, very crafty. Very crafty. We're going to go to global research now. Continue this legacy of the 44th President of the United States. An article by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who was at one time the Treasury Secretary under the Ronald Reagan administration. He's had a change of view of some things, as a matter of fact, and writes really some journalism for the people. The name of this article from originally his website, but posted on Global Research, is entitled Historical Legacy of Obama, the War Criminal, Butcherer of Women and Children. U.S. dropped 26,171 bombs during his 8-year presidency? Nope. In 2016 alone, the United States dropped 26,171 bombs in 365 days. He goes on to say, there's no doubt that U.S. President Barack Obama is a war criminal, as are his military and intelligence officials and most of the House and Senate. Obama is the first president to keep the U.S. at war for the entirety of his 8-year regime. During 2016 alone, the U.S. dropped 26,171 bombs on wedding parties, funerals, kids' soccer games, hospitals, schools, people in their homes and walking their streets, and farmers tilling their fields in 7 countries: Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan. What does the administration have to show for 8 years of illegal military interventions in 7 countries, none of which comprise a danger to the U.S. and against none of which the U.S. has declared war? Terrorism was created by U.S. invasions. No wars have been won, and the Middle East has been consumed in chaos and destruction. Worldwide hatred of the United States has risen to a record high. The U.S. is now the most despised country on earth. They call it the Great Satan. The only purposes of these crimes is to enrich the armaments industry and advance the insane neoconservative ideology of U.S. world hegemony. A tiny handful of despicable people have been able to destroy the reputation of the United States and murder millions of peoples, sending waves of war refugees to the U.S. and Europe. We call these wars, but they're not. They're invasions, largely from the air, but Afghanistan and Iraq from troops on the ground. The invasions by air and land are entirely based on blatant, transparent lies. The justifications for the invasions have changed a dozen times. The questions are, if Trump becomes president, will Washington's massive crimes against humanity continue? If so, will the rest of the world continue to tolerate Washington's extraordinary evil? Paul Craig Roberts writes in Global Research. Very short, to the point, in your mouth article. Very powerful article. Let's continue. We'll do this one. From Dissent Magazine. The name of the article is entitled, A Devil We Know. Robert Greene in the Winter 2017 edition. A Devil We Know. Dissent Magazine. Donald Trump's victory. Well, that jumped fast. Donald Trump's victory has become an occasion for soul-searching and fierce debate among liberals, leftists, and their allies. But lost in the mix of all the recriminations and arguments is a clear-eyed attempt to imagine what life for Americans will actually look like under Trump, and then what we want it to be after he is out of office. If we are to look beyond the next 4 years, we must create a movement that is not simply anti-Trump, but that presents left politics as a compelling alternative. In preparing to fight the anti-labor, anti-immigrant, racist, and misogynist practices of a Trump administration, history can help us understand how activists and radicals in previous eras of social turmoil fought for a better future. Malcolm X said, history is the best qualified to teach anyone. If you don't know history, well, you're doomed to repeat it. The left resounded to a similar national challenges in the 1920s and 30s. In the wake of the Red Summer of 1919, this country reeled under growing racism across the nation and a crackdown on dissent. As racially motivated attacks against African Americans occurred in Chicago and elsewhere, an anti-black program was underway in Elaine, Arkansas. The Ku Klux Klan became a truly national organization with significant political power in several states. Americans who simply exercised their right to speak out were threatened with deportation to the newly formed Soviet Union. And for radicals such as Emma Goldman, this happened. The destruction of the left-wing press during the First World War and the reversal of otherwise good socialist fortune at the voting booths saw a depleted left movement in the United States by the middle of the 1920s. Labor struggled to stay relevant during an age of greed and unbridled wealth, despite rapid gains during the Great Depression by the labor movement and the growing political power of African Americans following the New Deal. The 1930s were no walk in the park either. The collapse of the General Textile Strike of 1934 and the failure to pass an anti-lynching bill stand out as two notable examples of defeat during this era. But during the 20s and 30s, leftists, liberals, and progressives continued to organize and agitate for the interests of all Americans. The American Civil Liberties Union, formed in 1920 as a result of the dispiriting clampdown on free speech during the First World War. Patterns. Do you see the patterns, people? At the same time, the NAACP launched legal challenges that would eventually bring an end to Southern white primaries that allowed only whites to vote in Democratic primaries in the region, and subsequently opened the door for school desegregation. The Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which formed in Arkansas in 1934, exemplifies a tradition of radical, cross-racial organizing in the South that we must never forget. Class, people. The STFU, we also know what that means, had to deal with both hostile police forces and right-wing organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan, and they joined forces with entities as different as the African American Church and the Congress of Industrial Organizations to fight them. Their planning, spirited debate, and effective organizing can serve as inspiration to us under the Trump regime. But unlike STFU and other labor organizations in the 1930s and 40s, we also must make room for more radical leaders within our movements and include them in both short-term and long-term organizing. The other historical lesson came in 1980. The rise of Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter's embattled presidency, a weak economy, and the rise of white nationalism all gave American leftists pause. The murder of 5 leftist protesters in Greensboro, North Carolina on November 3, 1979 at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis was only the most visible incident in a rise of white supremacist activity toward the end of the 70s. Leftists feared that the nation was falling down a fascist right-wing hole from which it would not recover. This was in the 80s, the late 70s and 80s. So here we are in 2017 dealing with the same matters. As much as has changed, much has stayed the same in America. Reaganism presented the left with a challenge no generation had seen before. Rollbacks in civil rights, indifference toward early HIV/AIDS victims, and the Cold War arms race all pose serious challenges for left-wing activists. Massive electoral defeats for the Democratic Party in 1980 and 1984 showed that conservatism was in the driver's seat in national politics. Meanwhile, the continued decline of organized labor, the need for civil rights organizations to fight a rear guard action to protect affirmative action, and the damage to second-wave feminism wrought by the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment meant that the major pillars of left organizing in America were all under siege. As before, radicals banded together to win significant victories against a strong conservative opposition. The Rainbow Coalition gave Jesse Jackson political legitimacy and at the same time energized African Americans across the country. And many Americans backed the movement against apartheid in South Africa. All these movements defended against the excesses of the Reagan years, but simultaneously advanced an alternative vision of the future, to build on the best of both New Deal liberalism and New Left activism. This included increasing federal support for social programs and spending less on the Cold War arms buildup, and ultimately creating an America that was a safe, prosperous place for everyone, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, or class, the author writes. We're looking for righteousness, though. We're wanting to establish a righteous rule of Torah emanating from the Holy Land. Let me continue. Today, as terrifying as it is to confront the needs, the left needs to consider that white nationalism, misogyny, and xenophobia always lurks underneath the veneer of modern politics. Donald Trump has simply revealed to us the nation that, in more pessimistic moments, many of us knew existed. He's bringing it out. But rather than succumb to the despair of "this is not the America I know," we must instead say, "I will fight for the America that is wanted." This is what the author is writing. We have to fight for the existence of the world, the order, the harmony, the peace of the world. And Israel has to be the vanguard in doing so. And we have to demonstrate a life of righteousness, not just, believe in it. We have to actually demonstrate it. It is imperative for us to do so. I'm going to continue this article here. So, the author says, "I do not present these historical movements or moments as feel-good stories or guarantees that everything will work out in the end. These examples should, however, make us realize that resisting the current right-wing impulse that threatens to undo generations of progressive activism, policy, and legislation means going all out." And this is a global phenomenon. This is not just, the rise of populism in the United States. This is going on in Europe. This is going on in South America. This is going on in Africa. This is going on in Asia. Every continent is racked with these similar issues because the elite know that their time is up. The wicked know that their time is up. It's time for the righteous to stand and assume the reins. Continuing on. It means we as a nation need to talk about Flint and Standing Rock. It means repeating that black lives, regardless of who is in the White House, matter. Such efforts will require both keeping up pressure on elected Democrats to stand up for the majority of American people. Now, we know we need to be more directly involved in our government. We need to understand we are the government. So there's some points I don't necessarily agree with that this author or other authors write, saying putting pressure on Democrats. We need to put pressure on the system. We need to stop supporting and feeding the system if it is not meeting needs. We need to create our own system. Just be clear about that. Continuing on. Well, I'm going to leave off on that article there. It's an interesting article, but I want to just leave a couple of more thoughts with us. Let's see. Let's deal with this article here. Back to Black Agenda Report. This is one of my favorite websites dealing with this matter. The name of the article is called Black Awakening, Class Rebellion. This is by Keeanga Yamahtta Taylor and George Cicerelio Maher. I guess this is an interview. George Maher asked the question, the introduction to your book, Black Awakening in Obama's America, is a reference to Robert Allen's 1969 classic, Black Awakening in Capitalist America, which in its attentiveness to the complex interplay of race and class arguably represents a predecessor to your own book. To what extent do you see your work as a sequel to Allen's analysis of our prior generation struggle? And this is a good historical analysis dealing with historical materialism, dealing with a dialectic that we need to engage and understand our present situation in making a comprehensive analysis of our present circumstances. It's crucial to do this. Taylor says Allen captured the way that the black movement had the capacity to shake the American state to its core. The Black Awakening was not just an issue for black people, it was a threat to the system itself, and it still exists. And the system reacted accordingly. This is why we're seeing all these police murders, because they're seeing an awakening take place, particularly amongst the children of Israel. Allen pays particular attention to the repeated attempts of capital to absorb, usurp, and in some cases co-opt the black movement. If you haven't read, I forgot the National Security Memorandum number, but it was written by Henry Kissinger. And that's one of the things that they said that they had to do in order to deflect the attention from the rise of consciousness of black people, especially to thwart the capacity for a cross-continental alliance. Pan-Africanism is a huge threat to the system. In the aftermath of the rebellions in 1966 and 1967, business makes a concerted effort to insinuate itself into black urban neighborhoods as the friendly face of capital after black people had been burning and looting business operations. For some, the overtures of business were welcome. The promise of black-owned businesses and greater access to American affluence was alluring. But for the majority of black people, it was the struggle that promised a greater future. The black eruption of 2014 was not just a replay of events that preceded it 45 years earlier. It was a reaction to crises that went unresolved and continued to dog working class and poor black people. There have always been class tensions among African Americans, but they were magnified in the late 60s and 70s as the political establishment and business class combined in their efforts to develop a black middle class that could be called on to manage black cities and the people who lived in them. In part, the black movement today is a response to the failure of that strategy. Its most spectacular collapse was in Baltimore. Allen anticipated these developments, and we have much to learn from them. Then the interviewer asked the question, when Obama was elected, there was serious talk about a post-racial America. A few short years later, the idea that we have transcended race seems more like a punchline to a bad joke. You understand Obama as emblematic of black leadership that is nevertheless post-black, actively complicit in the colorblind narrative that has brought us to where we are today. How do you interpret what you call the illusion of the Obama years and have black Americans awaken from that slumber? So Taylor says when Obama was elected, 70% of black people believed that King's dream had been achieved. There were enormous expectations that a black president would mean real improvement in the lives of ordinary black people. Obama cultivated the belief through the course of his presidential campaign. He linked his candidacy to other upsurges from below that upset the status quo. He talked about the abolitionist movement, the sit-down strikes of the 1930s, the Stonewall uprising for LGBTQ liberation, and of course he invoked the civil rights movement and situated his electoral victory as the ultimate fruit of that struggle. But from the beginning, Obama then went out of his way to distance himself from black demands, even though black voters were the reason he won the White House. That's called betrayal, people. Obama had promised very little other than the ability to forge a new atmosphere in Washington, but he delivered even less. Perhaps more perniciously, however, he preserved the space where black people were continually blamed for their own condition. He mocked poor parents' eating and reading habits while parroting right-wing mythologies about black fathers and that black students think success means acting white. Meanwhile, not only is life not improving, but black unemployment, underemployment, housing security, and other barometers of the quality of life were deteriorating. All the while, Obama was overseeing the deadly status quo within the criminal injustice system. All of this combusted in the summer of 2014 when Michael Brown was murdered in the streets of Ferguson. Enough was enough. So then the interviewer asked, a group centering on Adolph Reed has recently criticized you for claiming that when the black movement goes into motion, it throws the entire mythology of the United States, freedom, democracy, and endless opportunity into chaos. But isn't this point, which, as you write, was shared by Martin Luther King Jr. and Richard Nixon alike, just transparently true? From radical Reconstruction to the Civil Rights Movement to Black Lives Matter, isn't it simply undeniable that just as white supremacy is the linchpin of U.S. capitalism, black movements have always catalyzed broader anti-capitalist resistance? It is patently true, Taylor says, which made the negative reaction to the statement bizarre. The U.S. is a deeply ideological society, mainly because it is so completely and thoroughly unequal. The tiny clique that controls resources in the political class in this country relies on its well-rehearsed myths about social mobility, the American dream, and the exceptional and unparalleled greatness of the United States. The black movement derails that entire train of thought. We are talking about a people brought here in slavery, and then when slavery ended, a people subjected to 100 years of legal subjection and second-class citizenship. And then for the last 50 years, a people segregated in poor and under-resourced neighborhoods, terrorized by police, and then disproportionately imprisoned. If the world understood the ways that black people have been victimized by the U.S., this country's authority, which flows through its self-promotion as the world's greatest democracy to impose its will on the rest of the world, would be called into the question, as it was in the aftermath of World War II. It is why the black movement has been the foundation for the emergence of other liberation movements, as it was during the rebellion of the 60s. Whether we know it or not, the world follows us. We are the ones who set the tone. We are the ones who establish the standard and set the banner. Whether we know it or not. Whether it be in fashion, whether it be in music, whether it be political matters. The world follows us. So imagine if we understood that particular reality, organized, unified, studied our culture, and put that into motion. The rest is history. I'm not going to finish this article out. I'm going to link it into the text box. I want to close with a couple of articles dealing with the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., being that there is an annual observance of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King just around the corner. And I think many times the legacy of King during this particular day is truly watered down. It is truly underappreciated, misunderstood, and packaged in a way that pacifies the man. Even though in his early beginnings he was co-opted himself, and then the speech that truly signed his death certificate, that which dealt with the Vietnam War, and then his Poor People's Movement, was what redefined the legacy of Dr. King. And of course, I think that, his fight for civil rights was something that was needed as a strategy for that particular time, because there had to be some type of breathing room that our ancestors needed and our elders needed during that time period. But I think his watershed moment was shortly before his assassination. And he sat in a room, according to Harry Belafonte, looking very distressed. And Belafonte asked him, "What's wrong?" And he's like, we've done all the great work. We fought long and we fought hard, and that's commendable. He said, but I fear that we've integrated our people into a burning house. And that is when he realized we set the wrong course. We've gone about this all in the wrong manner. We should not be seeking for equality. We should have been seeking for equity. We should have been seeking for opportunities to become self-determined. In justice, we should have been seeking for justice. We should have been seeking to secure our future. First and foremost, we should have undergone a cultural revolution. I think that is Martin's true legacy. But I want to review an article by David Krieger. It's called Martin Luther King Jr. and the Bomb. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the world's great peace leaders. I'm not a proponent of Gandhi, but he mentions Gandhi, who was a staunch racist. Like Gandhi before him, he was a firm advocate of nonviolence. In 1955, at the age of 26, he became the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, and 2 years later, he was elected the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Within a decade, he would receive the Nobel Peace Prize at the age of 35. It came 2 years after he witnessed the terrifying prospects of nuclear war during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. King's Nobel lecture, delivered in December 1964, is worth reviewing. He compared mankind's technological advancement with our spiritual progress and found us failing to keep pace spiritually. He said there is a sort of poverty of the spirit which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we have become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. And herein lies the true nature of the United States. But when you look in the annals of history, you will see that every empire, every world power suffered from the same condition. They had advancement in science, technology, but they had erosion in the realm of spiritual discipline and consciousness. He says we have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple act of living together as brothers. The yawning gap between mankind's technological advancement and spiritual poverty led King to draw this conclusion. If we are to survive today, our moral and spiritual lag must be eliminated. Enlarged material powers spell enlarged peril if there is not proportionate growth of the soul. When the without of man's nature subjugates the within, dark storm clouds begin to form in the world. He found that mankind's spiritual lag expressed itself in three interrelated problems: racial injustice, poverty, and war. When King elaborated on war, he spoke of the ever-present threat of annihilation, clearly referring to the dangers of nuclear weapons. Recognizing the dangers of denial or rejection of the truth about the nuclear predicament, he went on. A world war, Yah forbid, will leave only smoldering ashes as a mute testimony of a human race whose folly led inexorably to ultimate death. So if modern man continues to flirt unhesitatingly with war, he will transform his earthly habitat into an inferno such as even the mind of Dante could not imagine. King came to the following realization. Somehow, we must transform the dynamics of the world power struggle from the negative nuclear arms race, which no one can win, to a positive contest to harness man's creative genius for the purpose of making peace and prosperity a reality for all the nations of the world. In short, we must shift the arms race into a peace race. If we have the will and determination to mount such a peace offensive, we will unlock hitherto tightly sealed doors and transform our imminent cosmic elegy into a psalm of creative fulfillment. This is where Israel steps into the gap. This is where we teach the world to make no more war, where we beat swords into plowshares and we beat spears into pruning hooks. This is what Israel is called to do. Stand up, Israel. Rise up and become who Yah has called us to be. This is our destiny. This is our calling. One day prior to his assassination on April 4, 1968, King gave a speech at the Riverside Church in New York City that was highly critical of the war in Vietnam. Many of his close advisors urged him not to speak out and to instead keep focus on the civil rights movement, but he felt the time had come when silence is betrayal and chose to state his position. He put the Vietnam War squarely within his moral vision and spoke against it to the great displeasure of Lyndon Johnson and many other political leaders. Keep in mind, the United States was found guilty the same year, I believe 93, when the whole, I think it was the Monica Lewinsky fiasco was taking place. But they were found guilty of conspiracy to assassinate Dr. King. So they were found guilty in his assassination. The United States government. In addition to speaking his mind on the war, he also said that nuclear weapons would never defeat communism and called for reordering our priorities to pursue peace rather than war. He argued a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Well, America must be dead. Because if you look at the budget of the military-industrial complex, it eclipses other nations combined. Their budget annually, it eclipses it completely. Were he still with us, there can be little doubt that King would be highly critical of America's continuing war since Vietnam and his plan to spend $1 trillion on modernizing its nuclear arsenal. Since his death, the gap between our technological prowess and our spiritual moral values has continued to widen. We would do well to listen to King's insights and follow his vision if we are to have any chance of pulling out of the descending spiral leading to the nation's spiritual death. David Krieger, the author of this article, is the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. I have one last article I want to read. Then we're going to close out. We're going to deal with a similar article with Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Doctor. And this article comes to us from Global Research as well. Excuse me. It is written by Abayomi Akiziwe. The name of the article is Dr. Martin Luther King's Legacy, Linking the Civil Rights Movement to the Struggle Against War and Poverty. Akiziwe says 5 decades ago, the SCLC leader took a firm position in opposition to the United States occupation of Vietnam. On April 4, 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. took to the pulpit at Riverside Church in New York City to denounce the escalating United States imperialist intervention in Vietnam. Several days before, on March 25, King, along with pediatrician Dr. Benjamin Spock, who at the time was the co-chairman of the National Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, led a mass demonstration in Chicago calling for the administration of the then President Lyndon B. Johnson to enact an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal from Southeast Asia. Marching also with King at the front of the demonstration was Al Rabi of the Chicago Coordinating Committee of Community Organizations, Jack Spiegel of the United Shoe Workers Union, and Bernard Lee, an assistant to King in the local chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There were also members of the Veterans for Peace in Vietnam who walked alongside the others at the head of the manifestation, which included thousands of people. This was the first demonstration that King had participated in against the war. Earlier, in an article published by the Chicago Defender in 1967, King had expressed his evolving public position. He evolved. He did not stay stagnant in his particular ideology and his views of the world. He changed his mind by truly tapping into the human spirit. Later in February, he delivered an address at an anti-war conference held in Southern California, sponsored by The Nation magazine. Although the SCLC leader had expressed reservations and even opposition to the escalating war in Vietnam since early 1965, he had refrained from participation in anti-war demonstrations because of that money that was in his pocket, and did not address the military intervention in a comprehensive fashion. For example, after he spoke at Howard University on March 2, 1965, he answered questions from the press where he stated that the war in Vietnam was accomplishing nothing and required negotiation. Later at the National Conference of the SCLC, he called for a halt to the bombing of North Vietnam and the empowering of the United Nations to proceed with negotiations for the cessation of hostilities. He said during his speech that, quote, "What is required is a small first step that may establish a new spirit of mutual confidence, a step capable of breaking the cycle of mistrust, violence, and war," end quote. Nonetheless, his wife, Coretta Scott King, had been far ahead of him in regard to issues related to world peace. In 1962, she traveled to the 18-nation disarmament conference held in Geneva, Switzerland, as a delegate from the Women's Strike for Peace. Later in 1965, Coretta Scott King spoke at 2 anti-war demonstrations on the Mall in Washington, D.C., and in New York at Madison Square Garden. Before the SCLC came out in opposition to the Vietnam War, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was led by, at the time, Stokely Carmichael, who later becomes Kwame Ture, had issued a comprehensive statement in January 1966, drawing a correlation between the failure of the Johnson administration to guarantee the democratic rights of African Americans and the massive deployment of U.S. troops in Vietnam. By 1967, demonstrations and rallies against the Vietnam War grew in their numbers and militancy. On April 15, 100,000 people marched from Central Park to the United Nations, demanding an end to the war. Drs. King and Spock, along with Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, the then chairman of SNCC, led the demonstration. In October of the same year, there was a demonstration at the Pentagon which resulted in clashes with the police. The growth of the anti-war movement coincided with the urban rebellions throughout the U.S., as well as unrest within the educational sector. One thing we have to understand unequivocally is that there is a direct connection between the oppression domestically and the intervention and the oppression abroad. This is all the result of Western civilization, white supremacy's imperialist agenda and hegemony. And this is what has and needs to be addressed. And what needs to be even made more clear is that it is a Luciferian agenda. That is what we have to truly make known, in that this is the fourth beast regime. The fourth beast being that of the imperial and the Holy Roman Empire. This is what this all comes down to. And this is what we must connect the dots to see and get others to see, so that we shall overcome it. And the way that we overcome it is, as the scriptures say, not by might, nor by power, but by Yah's spirit, by aligning ourselves with Yah's will, by doing his commands, observing and fulfilling his commandments. We can't bang against this beast physically. We'd be foolish. Now, we defend ourselves, we protect what is ours, but we cannot literally go head up with the beast. We have to bring them to our strength, which is the spiritual realm. And this is how we overcome, and this is how we ascend, and this is how we bring forth the kingdom that will never be taken, because it will be established in truth. But this is done through the elevation of consciousness. You want real revolution? Change your mind. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what is that good, perfect, and acceptable will of the Most High. That's where the revolution takes place. Back to the article. The growth of the anti-war movement coincided with the urban rebellions throughout the U.S., as well as unrest within the educational sector. Students and youth began to call for the removal of ROTC from high schools and college campuses, along with the defunding of military research. The youth had consciousness back in the day. It's almost gone. Not to say it's not present, but in America, we know the education system is failing our children, and the school-to-prison pipeline is thriving. We have to do better, people. Civil rights and economic justice. After the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the struggle of the African American people shifted to the implementation of these legislative measures in the South and other regions of the country in the North and West. Independent political parties and mass initiatives were established, such as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, the original Black Panther Party, in an effort to build substantial political power. The resistance to the independent political action by the state and federal governments after 1965 sparked urban rebellions in many cities, from New York and Los Angeles to Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit. The emergence of urban rebellion as a tactic within the struggle for national liberation and equality alarmed the Johnson administration, because it posed a direct challenge to its foreign policy, with African Americans serving in Vietnam disproportionate to their numbers within the overall population. Any successful anti-war movement calling for a rejection of the draft and the desertion of troops from the front lines would ensure a victory for the people of Southeast Asia. In his speech in the aftermath of the March 25, 1967 demonstration in Chicago, King noted that, quote, poverty, urban problems, and social progress are generally ignored when the guns of war become a national obsession, when it is not our security that is at stake, but questionable and vague commitments to reactionary regimes. Values disintegrate into foolish and adolescent slogans. King went on to say, America is a great nation, but honesty impels me to admit that our power has often made us arrogant. We feel that our money can do anything. We arrogantly feel that we have some divine messianic mission to police the whole world. We are arrogant in not only allowing young nations to go through the same growing pains, turbulence, and revolution that characterize our history. We arm Negro soldiers to kill on foreign battles, but offer little protection for their relatives from beatings and killings in our own South. And I'm just going to leave off on that there because this article continues on for a little more. Very, very insightful article by Abayomi Azikiwe about the legacy of Dr. King, which is coming up on the 16th, next Monday, next Yom Shani here in the United States, in commemoration of the legacy of a man who also demonstrates the beauty of transformation and change and a selflessness in his service towards the people. A leader in many ways. And so, this is our weekly broadcast of Hebrew Vision Live. You can also join us on Shabbat, and we have a weekly offering that is presented by myself, the N-Type Scribe, on our Pal Talk cyber class that we also host. So feel free to tune back in on Shabbat day. Anywhere between the hours of 9:30 and 11:30, you will hear an offering by your host, Mikhail Korban-Yahu, the End-Time Scribe. Want to thank you all for tuning in this evening, and hope that this show has been edifying to you. And we went over some current events and look at some of the situations and circumstances on our geopolitical horizon in the spirit of prophecy. It is my prayer that everything that has been stated has been to your edification and to your insight, and has been spoken in truth and in the spirit of the Most High. Do join us again next week as we will continue this broadcast or this podcast of Hebrew Vision Live, where Yah is our Elohim and Yahoshua is Mashiach. So thank you for tuning in. May Yah bless you and keep you. May Yah cause his countenance to shine upon you and be kind unto you. May Yah lift up his face unto you and give you peace. Shalom Aleichem.
Let my people That's why we're hysterical. Spent 400 years in the belly of a cannibal, swallowing souls, throwing dry bones to the animals under the table. System bloodthirsty dogs run iron ankles, uninspiring outlaws creating concussions with the whispering walls. We go circle seven, blast trumpets and watch it fall while y'all committing crimes to extermination. With genocide, dirty water, radiation, prison poverty, and serving protect sanctions. We better get out the way. The father's done with it. We better go. But you didn't know that I was when you touch them, you touch me. I will call you by name. Let my people go.
Swing, 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 swing. Those who check get caught, taking home, cause I've been in exile from Babel to Rome, and it's been so long since I see my land. So come save your sheep with your mighty hand as the world is cloaked in the dark of night. As the time has come to see the sun's light, while some fight for wealth, we fight for liberty. So to overcome the world is gonna take you and me to bring forth the kingdom, which is our ultimate goal. That's why we're telling Pharaoh to let our people go. Let our